This podcast is supported by the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of the nation's most powerful environmental defenders rooted in the South. Right now, we stand at a crossroads for our environment, and SELC is ready to tackle the challenges ahead, ready to hold the line on environmental protections, ready to ensure people have the clean air, clean water, and healthy climate they deserve, and ready to stand up to powerful interests in the courtroom, the halls of government, and communities across the South. To learn more, visit southernenvironment.org.
Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
We're back on the Nada Yada Island Confessions Show. Benny is about to tell us how he found two loves. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks to Metro, I found iPhone 12 and Apple Watch SE.
At Metro, get the perfect match of both iPhone 12 with 5G and Apple Watch SE for only $99.99. You heard that right. Both for just $99.99. Holidays with Nada Yada Yada. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
Bring your number and ID, sign up for Metro Flex Plus, and add a watch line. Not available if you're with T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days. Limit 2 per account.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Steve McQueen's Blitz, Dud or Hit edition. It's Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. On today's show, Blitz is the new feature film from the director Steve McQueen, he of 12 Years a Slave, of course. This one stars Saoirse Ronan as a mother of a biracial child who's gone missing in London during the Blitz. It's now on Apple TV Plus. And then Get Millie Black is a crime thriller. It's on HBO, or I guess Max, or whatever it's called these days. It stars Tamara Lawrence as a Scotland Yard detective who returns to her native Jamaica to reunite with her brother, who is now her sister, and becomes a detective there, unveiling layers of corruption as she goes. And finally, we discuss the influencer wars, which have entered a curious new phase. What counts as being copyrightable and original in a world built on copying? Joining me today is Dan Kois, Slate, what to call you, Renaissance man, editor, writer, podcaster, and of course, author of many books, including his latest Hampton Heights. Dan, thanks for stepping in.
I'm so happy to be here.
And June Thomas, Gabfest OG to end all OGs. I should say also author of the really wonderful book, A Place of Our Own, 6 Spaces That Shaped Queer Women's Culture. Hey, June, welcome back.
Hey, Steve. Thank you for having me.
Shall we?
Let's
do it. George, played by Elliot Heffernan, is a small boy around 10 with a notable difference. In 1940s London, at least, his father was black, his mother white. His father has long since been deported, returned back to Grenada. But George is being raised in a happy, playful, loving home by his mother, Rita, played by Saoirse Ronan, and his grandfather, played by Dan, ?
Paul Weller, baby.
Paul Weller sighting. He plays the granddad.
talk about going underground.
Okay, for those of you out there whose head might not be exploding in all kinds of trippy fireworks, Paul Weller was the founder, lead singer, guitarist, principal songwriter of the amazing British kind of punk band, The Jam, who was a religion. They were a religion to me because they landed right when I entered, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade. I mean, just an amazing band. And he's sort of this ornery kind of he was huge, I know, in England, but the Jam never broke in the States like the Clash. Maybe this is a discussion for another day, but now he plays the grandfather. And I was like, is that Paul Weller?
Exactly.
Anyway, let's get back to George and his mother, Rita. George, along with the greater mass of children of London, is now being sent when the movie opens to the countryside to escape the Blitz, the unrelenting bombing of major cities by the Nazis. George, however, has other ideas, and when he bolts from the train carrying him off, he begins an Odyssean journey back to find his mother. The film is directed by Steve McQueen, as I said, of 12 Years a Slave renown. In the clip, we will hear Rita, played by Ronan, learning her young son has run away from his chaperones during this evacuation. Let's listen.
I'm sorry to say it's been brought to our attention that your son, George Hanway, did not arrive at his destination. A child who befriended him told us that he jumped from the train. He jumped? He got to his feet and waved to his friend. He didn't appear to be... He was placed in your care. You're responsible for his safety.
Now, this must be a shock, Rita, but please contain yourself.
No, where is he? Where's my boy? Why can't you tell me where he is?
All the relevant authorities have been informed, including the police.
You were meant to be looking after him.
All the protocols were followed in accordance with the law.
Where's my bleeding son?
I left him in your care yesterday morning.
Here are our details, Mrs. Hanway. If he finds his way home, please let us know.
Rita?
June, let me begin by saying it honestly is a kismet kind of coinky fluke. Like no one planned doing two Brit-centric topics while you were a host of the show, but here we are. Let me start with you. What'd you make of this film?
I liked it. I seem to have liked it more than most of the reviewers. It is, though, a picaresque movie. I mean, it's kind of a series of vignettes where George, has an experience, runs to another experience. And so it is kind of a series of discrete incidents. And not all of them worked. Maybe there was one more than there needed to be. My attention wasn't permanently grabbed. But I really still liked it because I felt that it was challenging some attitudes or even just some facts that I thought I was very familiar with. I thought I knew, even right from the beginning, in the opening kind of setup of the movie, I guess the opening credits, it says that 1.2 million were evacuated, more than half of them children during the war, during World War II. And I thought that all the evacuees were children. There have been a lot of TV shows, maybe movies, I think mostly TV shows in my experience, about evacuees. It's mostly about how they become alienated from their city parents by their experience in the country. There are these narratives that have emerged that have become familiar. And this one did feel quite different. And I liked it. And little Elliot, who plays George, I thought was lovely. I thought Ollie the cat was fantastic. I managed to be surprised at various points. And although there were some kind of a few things that are now basically cliches, like, Cockneys singing and with spoons and a washboard. But at the same time, I liked how musical it was. That's very Almodovarian. He always finds room for a song in a movie, and this one had about 3. One of those songs was in the underground, and there've been so many representations of World War II, of people sheltering in the underground. I didn't know until I saw this movie that people had to fight to shelter in the underground.
That was totally news to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was like mind blowing and really powerful and done for what it was, really quite subtly. So yeah, it wasn't like a perfect 10 by any means, but I got a lot out of this film.
June's right that the reviews have not been particularly kind. Like Alyssa Wilkinson and the Times aside, a lot of reviewers, Dana included, have responded to this movie more or less complaining, well, Steve McQueen made sort of a very conventional war movie, and why isn't he making something more ambitious? And I could not disagree more with that take. I just found this incredibly ambitious in, as June says, the way it's trying to undercut and argue with a lot of received notions of the Blitz and the British war effort, and even of what London was like and who was living there at the time. I've been watching a lot of Powell and Pressburger recently, and I just watched A Canterbury Tale a couple weeks ago, for this 3rd or 4th time. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I love that movie. But the view of the war effort in Blitz is so unexpectedly complex in comparison, to its benefit. I think like its vision of a multicultural London, one that has people from all over the world, is beset by racism, even as the city is also coming together against the Nazis. The way the movie is both incredibly sentimental and also incredibly cynical about human nature, with its mix of helpful Londoners pitching in and then rapacious Londoners cashing in, literally stealing rings off of corpses. I mean, even in that, in that movie's like sort of big centerpiece, set piece, the flooded tube station, there are people knocking George over, and then there's like a hand from nowhere, a hand from the sky that pulls him out of the water, a person we never see, but who saves him. I found all of this like really moving and not even a little bit simplistic or conventional. And so I ended up loving this movie. Steve, what about you?
I side with Dana and the greater bulk of critics who think it's a dud. I agree abstractly with everything that you've described about the movie. Your experience of, I don't gainsay that was your experience of watching it. My experience of watching it was, this is what the movie wanted to do. And it's admirable for trying it. And all of it kind of made that outline, and then it painted in the colors by number in a kind of rote way that to me was totally disaffecting and didactic and boring. I just didn't think it was I did not find it to be a well-directed movie. What sets up the whole movie is there's an idealized family unit at the beginning. The good version of this movie and the bad version, and every version in between those has to have this thing being lost. And I loved the attempt to set it up as this, the absent father, the mother who's only redoubled her commitment to her son, who's sensitive to his plight as a racially ambiguous kid in a largely racially unambiguous and racist society. And then the grandfather, who says very little but is quite wise about the whole situation.
And is literally Paul Weller.
And is literally Paul Weller, and is really loving while being somewhat reticent. I thought all of that was in concept was so good, because then you lose that unit. I mean, it's Odyssean, right? It's like what Odysseus wants to go home to is his dog Penelope and his home, right? And the Odyssey is also picaresque in that sense. I mean, it's exactly that, in the sense that it goes from, I don't know, the Isle of Circe, and it's sort of one to the next, and it's episodic in the same way that this movie is episodic. The problem is, it always felt like a setup. It didn't fill in with any depth or warmth or kind of nuanced humanity that made these people specific to me. They seemed like marionettes. This wasn't a convincingly humanized and specific portrait of that family to make me ache for his return. And then each episode is preposterously dramatic and stagey and affected. I just found every gesture in this movie telegraphed and affected in order to produce, a specific kind of effect while delivering a highly didactic lesson about the, ambiguities of World War II. And so in the actual execution, I found the movie alienating on a frame-by-frame basis. I thought it looked wrong. I thought the camera moved wrong and showed us the wrong things. I felt so much of the acting was stagey and kind of non-specific in a way. I thought it was just a chore from beginning to end to watch it. I didn't find, not one moment touched me with a kind of, plausible human essence. I just don't know why this movie landed so poorly with me, June, but let me poke a little bit at what you said, though. I mean, you're coming very close, it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, very close to damning with faint praise. Am I wrong?
No, I think you are wrong, because yes, it dragged a little for me. Not every episode sang. As I said, maybe there was one vignette too many. However, I don't recognize your description. It did have an emotional impact for me. I mean, even just seeing, and this is something that I have seen in other films and other fictional representations, just the damage of the Blitz, the idea that you go home and your street has disappeared. And for that to be an everyday experience, to be reminded of that, to be reminded of the trauma that people, most of whom at this point are now deceased, but whose children probably had to receive some of that unresolved trauma. That felt, just things like that felt very powerful to me. It was a reminder of how destructive and traumatizing the war was to non-combatants, to people who were at home. There are no politicians in this film. There are people in uniform, but not soldiers. I mean, and that's another thing, that like ARP wardens, the who went around and kind of cleaned up after a bombing, but also like watched out for blackouts. Those are usually figures of comedy in Britain. They weren't people who they didn't go to war, and so they were these were like, you see, this was a heroic role. Like that kind of thing felt important, and it did affect me. Did I love the movie with every pore of my being? No, but I respect it, and I was affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, you use Dan. I want to get back to you right away, but June, you use a phrase that really brought it home for me. This was notation on a musical stave. It wasn't music. It just never. There's something about the moment when the instruments give way to the logic of a piece of written music and music appears that didn't happen here. I saw all the little black dots in the clef or stave or whatever it's called, and I sort of could hum a little bit of the tune in my head, but it itself never sang for me.
I mean, you're describing it as schematic, and you're not wrong that it is schematic. And I would maybe argue that if you view the movie in a certain kind of light, that becomes a strength. And now it's not a strength that spoke to you or worked for you. But about halfway through this movie, it dawned on me that what I was watching was, I thought, a kind of perfectly executed children's adventure story. What it reminded me of, was the Treasure Island or a Hatchet or a Coram Boy or even like His Dark Materials. Honestly, like an adventure that plops a kid down in a tragic, nightmarish, almost hellish situation, much bigger than himself, and forces him through trial after trial. Often they're presented episodically, and it watches him get through all of those on ingenuity and pluck, even as he's sort of forever changed by the experience. And a lot of these books are pretty grim, like Coram Boy, pretty fucking grim. Dickens, pretty fucking grim. And yet there is a kind of joy for me in watching a skilled storyteller. And we can argue later, Steve, about your assertion that every shot was wrong in this Steve McQueen movie. But in watching a storyteller set these dominoes up and then knock them over, and the setting up is by its nature meant to be a little obvious. You are meant to understand the kind of role that this next episode is to play in the framework of this character's adventure. You're meant to understand that when he meets Ife, the heroic warden, that he's going to learn a certain set of things from that. And you're meant to understand that when he's betrayed by the woman who finds him on the street, who sells him to the rapacious thieves, who, are stealing from the dead, that he's meant to learn another set of things. Yet I find that a form that is very meaningful to me and effective on me. And I've actually read a couple of reviews of this that make, to me, an insane assertion that no kid would ever watch this movie. Like, this movie would have blown me out of the water when I was 10. I liked it a lot now, but if I watched this when I was 10, it would have been the greatest movie I'd ever seen. And to me, that's not damning with faint praise. That's praising it for, I think, expertly executing a specific genre that people don't always make anymore. But also, I recognize that I'm making the claim that the stuff that struck you as artificial and too easy, I'm claiming that it makes this movie work for me.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's let that be the last word. Leave it on a positive note. This is as divided as I think we typically get on the podcast. So it'd be interesting to have people write in and just say if they've seen it, what they thought.
That's entertainment. That's entertainment.
They knew this was the people's war, and they were the people.
It's great when you can get someone a gift they wouldn't necessarily get for themselves, that little bit of luxury that they don't know they're missing. For quality gifts at an affordable price, the go-to is Quince. I love doing these Quince ads because I can say very sincerely that I am a Quince customer and a very, very happy one indeed. I went to a warm weather place to celebrate Thanksgiving with friends, and I wore Quince's linen summer weight shirts. They're so nicely made. They're very affordable. All the Quince clothes I have, sweaters, pants, tops, bottoms, all of them, I'm very, very, very happy with the quality and the customer service of this company. Gift luxury this holiday season without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/culture for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little money there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Get Millie Black is a British-produced TV series. It's set in Jamaica, not brochure Jamaica, resort Jamaica, but Kingston, a hard-luck city displaying everywhere the savage after-effects of British colonialism. Millie Black is a police detective who was partially raised in London and who worked for Scotland Yard before returning to her home country, in part to find her beloved brother who, when she left as a young girl, was in the process of being tormented to death by their abusive mother for being gay. Now Orville is Hibiscus, a trans woman living and working around the Gully, the most dangerous, as it's depicted here at least, neighborhood in a dangerous city. She's tricking and being subject to hate-inspired violence. Millie is trying simultaneously to rescue her sister and crack a case involving the abduction of a small child. As she investigates, an onion begins to unpeel before our eyes, revealing layers not just of corruption, but of a history of white supremacy and exploitation. The show stars Tamara Lawrence as the estimable Millie and China McQueen as Hibiscus. An amazing, amazing performance, I should say. In the clip we're about to hear, Scotland Yard has just dropped a white English detective in the middle of Millie's case. We hear Millie and this outsider, Luke, played by Joe Dempsey, sparring on a beach near the crime scene. They're both referring at one point to Freddie, who is a white and rich Jamaican who's implicated in the crimes. Let's listen.
Picking up a witness is a job for a subordinate, not super.
But the case he's helping us with is important. Couldn't risk corruption in the local police force.
My memory of the British police is you've never been short on corrupt coppers.
So that's why you left Scotland Yard. Too clean for us.
Only so much shitty weather and institutionalized racism I could take. Should we stick to the subject? Why is Freddie testifying? What have you got in him that his daddy can't get him out of?
I really can't say.
The crime on UK soil or Jamaican or...
This a Pavlovian thing? The questions? You'll let me know if you get a lead on Freddie.
Say jump?
Jump.
How high, Scotland Yard?
Dan, let's start with you. What'd you make of this show?
I would describe Get Millie Black as a solid mystery that benefits incredibly from its setting and the way it uses that setting, and suffers substantially from its novelistic pretensions. It's got great performances. It's got great direction. I'd like to talk at some point a little bit about the director, who is someone I love. And the setting is, a setting because it's an unfamiliar place to set a mystery to me. Really good mysteries really benefit from having a setting that is rich in character, rich in atmosphere, and also rich in cultural context. And so you've got this like hard division between uptown and downtown Kingston. You've got, rich white people with Jamaican accents, a thing you almost never see in American media. You have the homophobic culture and then the underground life of the Gully. And then right in the middle of it, Millie's partner in the police force, who's a closeted gay guy. It's an extremely rich setting. And Marlon James, who created this, who, the novelist Marlon James, is making full use of it from episode to episode. And that's what will keep me watching. The mystery is fine. And then you've also got all these like the novelistic voiceover. Oh my God, the voiceover drives me crazy. It's like the curse of the novelist creator making his first television show. And I almost had to turn it off at times when that voiceover really got cooking. June, what did you think?
Dan, I am so with you. Like in the first episode, I noticed that we got 5 minutes into the show before the first voiceover came to an end. And I really loved the show. I loved it. I think I'm more positive about it than you. I agree with everything you said. I thought it was, it had the things that I want in a kind of quality mystery. I will watch pretty much any mystery. I've watched some mysteries that are just flat out bad. I've watched every episode, watched some of them twice. I don't need a lot, but this is, I think, a good mystery. And what does that involve? It involves complication. This has complication. It involves realism. This doesn't have, ultra realism where we have to hear the beep of the, the recording of the interview with the police. It's not that level of realism, but it's quite realism. It's got great acting. It doesn't oversimplify things. It does have a high body count, which is not necessarily good, but it does score points in some quarters. And it involves corruption, which everybody always seems to love and obviously is a problem in policing. I loved it. And I just wish that they could have just taken out some of that VO, because it does not, I do not need to be told that, the shadow of slavery hangs over Jamaica. That is pretty clear from what goes on in this film. Yes, I see that. I'm a person who actually does, I often don't see things. I rely on the words that are in a show or a movie rather than the visuals. It is a flaw in my ability to process art. But I certainly didn't need to be told that Jamaica has some problems with colonialism and colorism and homophobia, but I did appreciate to really see this rich queer life in Jamaica. I have queer Jamaican friends, and they get so exasperated by this endless, Jamaica is so homophobic. And yes, it is, but that is not the end of the story. There is so much queer culture in Jamaica that, yes, is underground and yes, is illegal actually. And that is not claiming anything good about that, but I'm glad that it shows some queer joy amid all of that. So there were many things that I liked, but oh my God, that VO needed to go.
I'm with June on this one. I really, really liked and admired the show, and I'm going to stick with it with reservations. But it begins, the whole instigating action of the whole series is the brutally abusive homophobia of the mother figure of these two siblings who clearly love one another. They're very young at the time, maybe 10 and 8 or something, and take enormous amounts of solace and sense of safety from one another in an abusive household that gets set up very, very quickly. And Orville, the boy, is being just savaged with a belt by the mother and being called the F word and abused. And it's because Millie is ally and defender of Orville that she gets banished from the household. And it's interesting. What I found very well done and did not need the tell, don't show voiceover to drive home was that this is a show dominated by ghosts. The past is almost more interesting than the present in a way that doesn't in a way detract from the vividness or whatever sort of urgency of the main plots. But it's the ghost of the mother who's sort of bearing all of this hatred and bringing it to bear on her own children. She's dead by the time Millie returns to Jamaica, but she's staying in this house that her mother owned where all the abuse happened. And that's very, very richly portrayed. And obviously the ghosts of British colonialism. I really like the twist of a white male Scotland Yard detective with a case of his own that he treats as vastly more important than whatever these supposedly parochial inner politics of Jamaica, Black Jamaica are, dropping in, as if he's Deus Ex Machina and being the boss man and pushing people around. And he comes up against this tough detective who just won't take it. All of that is premised beautifully. To me, the absolute highlight of the series so far is China McQueen's depiction of hibiscus bis, especially in the second episode. That's where it really began to grab me. The very opening of the second episode, this dialogue or monologue really about, it's probably a voiceover actually from hibiscus about what's the difference between what's dead and what's alive to someone who's killed off their old name, right? Orville. There's a breathtaking moment where Millie mistakenly uses the name, the name Orville, and it's just, you just feel it in your gut. That was so wrong to do that. And so this person whose apprehension of what the past is and how it lives in the present is especially intense. It's just I think it's a brilliant portrayal, and it's the most sharply and specifically written character in the show. My main complaint with the show is sort of echoes both of yours, which is that Marlon James, incredibly enough, had a Jamaican detective for a mother. And you want the show to have more procedural authenticity to it. And you want the mystery to somehow be compelling. To use a word from our last segment, the mystery has so far, two episodes in, has a kind of, which is what's dropped so far, has a picaresque quality that seems quite standard. You're going from kind of corpse to corpse and lead to lead. None of it, you sort of know what the major conflict, in terms of how the case presents the major conflict of white and black and privileged and unprivileged. It seems routine in a way that everything else about the show is so brilliantly unroutine. But in the end, the performances are wonderful. The setting is astonishing. The social and sexual politics of Jamaica are completely gripping. So I'm in it. I'm going to stick with it.
Stephen, since you mentioned the white detective who's dropped in, who I have to just note is Gendry Baratheon. I was like, who is that guy? Who is that guy? Who is that guy? And they're like, oh my God, it's Gendry. But anyway.
Wait. Tell me and others who don't know who that is.
It was an important character in Game of Thrones.
The bastard son of King Robert, who is a square-jawed, slightly dumb hero who gets involved in various messes, but he's like a fan favorite character. And now all of a sudden he's all grown up and he's an asshole detective from Scotland Yard.
Exactly. But so that character really, in a way, was kind of seriously undercut something that I liked about the show, because it was kind of a cut above. And I can't really believe that Marlon James watches shit like this, but that is such a slap across the face of shows like Death in Paradise, which again is such a popular British show. Have I watched every episode 3 times? At least. But it is based on this monstrous idea of Scotland Yard. Again, I hope listeners aren't drinking every time they hear the word Scotland Yard this episode, but they always send a white Scotland Yard detective to this imaginary island in the West Indies to supervise a whole bunch of black cops who are locals. And so there was this slap across the face, which then of course led to some very on the nose dialogue, but which just did happen to be something I'd wished every cop in every episode of Death in Paradise had said to the white guy who drops in on them. So I do have to that was both rather lowbrow, but also I loved it. But Dan, I want to hear about the director, because I did not recognize the director's name. You said that you had feelings about the director. Please tell me about that.
Yeah. So the show, all 5 episodes, I believe, are directed by Tanya Hamilton. She was the director of Night Catches Us, a really great period drama set in 1970s Philly. It came out in 2010. It's on Slate's Black Film Canon. I love that movie. And what often you see happening to Black women directors, she has not made a feature since that movie in 2010. Now, thankfully, there's TV, so she can do really great work on TV, as in the work that she does here. Now, Steve, given that you are under the impression that every shot that Steve McQueen picked in Blitz was the wrong shot, you may not be aware of what directors do, but I thought she did a really good job in this. She's very good at framing an action sequence, something she did really well in Night Catches Us as well. And she's really good at coaxing or encouraging really great performances out of actors. And this show is chock full of great performances. And like Marlon James, she was born in Jamaica. She emigrated earlier than he did, but it's a real joy to see these immigrant artists return to Jamaica and wrestle with the complexities of the place they're from, something that has been a subject of Marlon James's forever, but to me seems new in Tanya Hamilton's work. And I really am happy to see her given a chance to shine on a show like this.
Dan, I just want to thank you. I was laboring under the false impression it was the director's job to make a movie good. And now I know that it's really just to deliver the product.
On budget, I bet.
On below that, yeah, that too.
And Steve, I do agree with you that the mystery at this point feels like a little basic, like it hits the notes you expect it to hit. But there was one moment in the second episode that I won't spoil exactly, but I will say, in which the lost child who she has been searching for is revealed to be perhaps more culpable in this sort of mysterious set of crimes that all are coming together. That to me was a kind of beacon that suggested maybe as this show goes on, this mystery is going to get more complicated and more surprising than the first two episodes have led me to believe. That, I think, is the other thing that's going to keep me going. That twist made me think, okay, maybe there's something else happening here.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dan. All right, the show is Get Millie Black. It's on Max. Check it out. We like it.
It's always fun to dive into the latest rumors like who's dating who will be on the next season of our favorite show. Well, here's one rumor to squash the idea that Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That means it's accepted basically anywhere across the country. Don't pay attention to every rumor out there. But remember, it does pay to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles in California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. Dana is a wine mom who knows wine, and she was the lucky recipient of a Justin delivery and loves the product. And that's way more than good enough for me. Enjoy exceptional wine all season long with Justin, whether it's for seasonal celebrations, festive dinner parties, or gift exchanges. Justin Wine is sure to make your holidays memorable. Pick up Justin Wine today at a store near you. Visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time. Okay, for our third segment, we're discussing an article in The Verge by the journalist Mia Sato called Bad Influence. It's about two influencers who met each other a number of years ago, went their separate ways. Many of the facts are now being disputed in litigation, but this is generally what happened. One began to, it appears, relentlessly copy the influencing style online and social media of the other. This is an enormously lucrative business, and the law is unsettled on this. What counts as a copyrightable act of originality, sufficient originality that another person mimicking it is running afoul of the law? Dan, let me start with you. Do I have those basic facts right? What struck you about this?
Yeah, so it's a lawsuit from one. They're both product influencers and mostly working in home goods. And so, they buy elegant, nested beige tables from Amazon, and then they unbox them for a video, and then they show them off in their elegant beige homes for a video, and then they get a cut whenever someone clicks on their link and buys that table on Amazon through their affiliate link. And yeah, one of them claims that the other one started copying her, and the object of the lawsuit says basically, well, we're all like this. What are you going to do? And so the question is, when is a vibe a copyright violation? And when is a vibe just simply what being an influencer is? And the piece, which I think is really well reported and nicely written, does make a certain kind of claim about what's at stake in this lawsuit. And that claim has to do with the journalists feeling that influencing is not taken seriously. That if you take influencing seriously as a business and as a creative act, you're forced to acknowledge that there is some kind of perhaps copyrightable, thing happening here that could be violated according to copyright law. Whereas the defense of the person who's being sued here essentially is, this isn't art. Like, this isn't, you can't copyright a vibe. You can't copyright a beige room. You can't copyright the way that everyone shoots their tables or their little ceramic gourds. That's just the way everyone does it. And that's just the way it is. It's no more copyrightable than wearing a hat sideways because you're looking for a certain vibe. And I found myself both interested in this argument and a little bit, and objecting to it a little bit, because I found, as I read this, I am incapable of taking influencers seriously. I'm incapable of taking them as seriously as the piece asks us to take them. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think they should have rights. It doesn't mean that I don't think it's a legitimate business and that I'm impressed by the hustle involved in it. But it does mean that I'm unable to believe that we should give influencing as a mode of expression the same protections as creative art, and give them the same protections as creative artists. Like, influencers are moneymakers. Influencing is a money-making enterprise. And so the transformation and warping of personal style to meet the marketplace, and then to take advantage of the algorithmic power of the crowd, is what it's about. That's what you're going for. And so by its nature, it tends toward everyone essentially inevitably selling the same thing in the same way, because everyone is chasing the same popularity, which comes from the same place. And so it's not art. Like, it shouldn't get copyright protection the way that a creative work does. Now, are there artists whose whole thing is just aping what's already popular and trying to sell it? Sure. We call them hacks, and influencers are also hacks. And so they should get the same copyright protection that hacks get, which is if you literally steal their photo and put it on your site, you've committed a copyright violation.
Yeah. I have to say, Dan, I like what you said about, the respect angle, because I think I have more respect for influencers or creatives, content creators. When I was making the Working podcast, I just had to say the term content creators for Isaac to break out in hives.
I remember getting drunk listening to that, or drinking every time you said it.
But I do think that, as you said, it's a hard job. But I also think that so much of the time we don't respect them because it is hack work, and it is. They deserve the same amount of protection and respect as, I don't know, Orwell? No. But when we disrespect them, when we diss them, when we dismiss them as just people who are doing the most obvious thing in the world, what we're actually doing is recognizing that we're all as basic as all get out. Because the reason that they all make the same beige ecru, thing, is because that's what people click. It's just like at Slate, when people say, why don't you do more foreign coverage? Well, you know why? Because nobody fucking reads it. And why do you people not make videos about beautiful, like, oh my God, this amazing piece of art that is, not everybody responds to the same way, that some people dislike intensely and other people have, no, because that is not what gets clicks. And you know what gets clicks? It's this basic beige bullshit. But also we don't blame that on the influencers. We blame that on ourselves. We're all clicking on it every time I complain about, oh my God, can you believe this story that I clicked through that's really just a write-up of a daytime competition show? Well, you know what? That's not the fault of the person who wrote that up. That's the fault of me who clicked on it. And I just think that we should just admit that we're all just basic bitches. I don't have TikTok. I don't follow many influencers on Instagram, but I watch a lot of YouTube. And even though I watch in a few different niches, you know what? They all have the same damn apartment. They all have the same windows. They all have the same furniture. They all have the same cute dog or cat. They all have the same blank walls to pose against. They all, they have the same coffee makers, and they make the same matcha lattes. And why do they do that? Is it because they're delicious? No, because that's not delicious. But you know what it is? It's quite telegenic. It's quite clickable. And we all like the same things. And I'm sorry, that's sad for us, but there we go.
But there's something really interesting there, right? Because All right, we're talking about radical degrees of sameness as produced by maybe the predictability of mass taste or possibly the algorithm's ability to form mass taste, homogenize it, and then feed it to us endlessly with this point of satiety somewhere off on the horizon at some point. I mean, at some point, it just people will get sick of it, click on something else, and inevitably will change. Okay, so that's this sort of radical, technologically induced sameness, which seems to belie any claim to copyrightable originality, against which some X factor difference that makes one Tweedledee the rich influencer and one Tweedledum the one with 50 followers. So it just displaces originality from the specifics of what's being curated or presented or even style of presentation onto something, some quiddity, personal quiddity of the person doing it. That strikes me as such an X factor and so ill-definable that to describe that as original is impossible. Original in an authorial way that deserves legal protection.
Right. It's essentially star quality.
Exactly.
It's an indefinable thing.
Charisma.
It's charisma, and all of its
uniqueness,
derivatives.
nerve, and talent, obviously.
Thank you. But what I would say is that there's a category error here, right? Which is that authorship, which is the copyrightable thing. Like we recently did a segment on the Gabfest that I really enjoyed because it just all of my weird hobby horses were addressed, which is that on the nature of authorship where it's totally ambiguous with the keyboardist for the Hold Steady, Franz Nicolai, who's been a session musician and a sort of, a sideman in a band, big band, and for his career. And he wrote a kind of semi-academic monograph. It's beautifully written and presented about like what in the music business, like what are musicians doing and when are they authors and when are they just work for hire? And one of the great examples is the bassist who played the iconic double bass line. It's not one bass, but two, one acoustic and one electric for Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side, which I believe is the riff that made that song a hit, right? I think it is so distinctive. It's what got sampled and it made Lou Reed rich. And this guy got paid $500. Now, who's the author of that song? That's a legal question. It's a moral question. It's all kinds of interesting questions. But that notion of authorship, especially when it comes to legal protections, is one of the ultimate Gutenberg revolution legacies. And we are now in a new Gutenberg revolution in which the first Gutenberg revolution is being so obliterated that taking these anachronistic terms like authorship, especially when it relates to ownership, and trying to apply them, having evolved completely beyond the printing press, strikes me as nuts. It's just crazy. None of this can possibly be conceived of as protectable. And I'll close by saying what's interesting to me isn't this question because it strikes me as just resolved on its face. It's an absurd claim. Way more interesting to me was her meat space 3D bricks and mortar, the reporter's visits to these two women, especially the home of the one who's suing. And I thought this was actually kind of a brilliant piece of journalism because it juggled all sorts of things, but very deftly and in an integrated way in the course of the piece, right? It both introduces you to these two rather vivid characters. It does without a sort of sniffy snob judgment. It gives you a sense of how weird what they do is in some sense and how it converges on this one sort of beige and ecru aesthetic, what that aesthetic is and what it signifies and why it might be the one that they converged on. And it walks you through the legal ramifications of a case like this, but then also it gets at that just utter melancholy of what it's like to be a person making a living this way and trying to produce, like trying to channel, what you're trying to do is predict or mirror what the greater mass of people with that amount of disposable income likes or will like in your own personal life in a way that makes it seem as though you live it organically, even though you actually are living it somewhat inorganically. And all you are is the kind of, as a human being, is you've just become the kind of intersection point of where all these tastes converge in some sense. And it renders you a kind of non-specific human in some weird way.
Yeah, it erases you. It covers you in beige paint.
Yes.
It does. And that's exactly right, Dan, that there's a kind of style of erasure to these quote unquote cozy homes that aren't cozy at all. They're like fucking Airbnbs, right? They're like hotel lobbies, right? That's what's so weird is that there's some, you would think this medium devoted to utter distinctiveness and the X factor that would make one person a social media star, it wouldn't conduce to this style and ethic of self-erasure. It's like the humanness of humans is literally getting erased in this process of trying to be the apex influencer.
Can I just say one last thing? And maybe this is irrelevant and maybe this is also wrong, but I'm really struck by the size of the suit. Like, the lawsuit is asking for $30,000 to $150,000, which just seems like, I mean, to me, so obviously low. That's nothing. But like, yes. For a lawsuit, like, that's just, I think it might actually be a play for attention, for us to, talk about them, not just us, but for there to be story. Because like, that's not even, I don't get out of bed for $150,000, So like, why would they?
Oh, that was worth it. That alone was worth the price of admission. Okay, one thing I will say, in addition to June's comment and Dan's insights, is what made this worthwhile was the piece itself, Bad Influence by Mia, and I'm sorry for not knowing whether it's Sato, S-A-T-O, or Sato, but her piece in The Verge from November 26, Bad Influence, is really worth seeking out. I just thought it was a really well-delivered piece of journalism.
And Franz Nicolai's book is called Banned People. Good book.
Thank you. Yes, that is a terrific book.
For individual expression in this and other interiors throughout the house, in their selection of such things as wall and floor coverings, and the accent colors of
This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Interest rates have fallen, but you can still lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com. That's a pretty big deal because when rates drop, so can the interest you earn on your investment. A bond account allows you to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high-yield and investment-grade corporate bonds. So while other people are watching their returns shrink, you could be earning regular interest payments. But a yield is not locked in until you invest, so check it out. The good news is it only takes a couple of minutes to sign up at Public.com. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account only at Public.com/culture. Brought to you by Public Investing member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info. All right, before we go any further, this is typically in our show where we discuss business. We have 2 items of business this week. First, very important, we would love to hear from you for our call-in show, an annual ritual up there with Strut in our fondness for it. It's seasonally motivated, of course. Right around the turn of the year, we have take a bunch of questions from listeners. You can call in and leave a voice memo that we may or may not play on the show. That number is 260-337-8260. You can also send an email to culturefest@slate.com with either a text question or you can embed a voice memo in the email. But ask us a question, and if we get to it, we'll answer it in the course of the show. All right, thanks. And then our second item of business, of course, is to tell you about our Slate Plus bonus episode, our Slate Plus episode, which is for Plus members. It comes in their feeds. This week, we are going to discuss closing credits of movies. Are you a stayer or a goer? Do you sit and stay and read them, or do you pop up when it's done, the end, you're done, and exit the theater? And if you do stay, why? We discuss with June and Dan. Okay, if you're not a Slate Plus member, what are you doing? Sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. It's our lifeblood. Members get free ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You also get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn and Political Gabfest. And members get unlimited access to all the great writing on Slate.com. You will never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I should also mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. These memberships are very important to Slate. I cannot stress this enough. Please sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Again, that's slate.com/culture plus, or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking try free at the top of the show page. All right, back to the show. All right, now is the moment in the podcast when we endorse Dan Kois. What do you have?
This is an endorsement from 1989, but I bet this movie is still good. It's the only previous murder mystery that I have watched set on a Caribbean island against a sort of reggae backdrop. It's The Mighty Quinn, starring a young Denzel Washington, very charismatic, very, very, very hot. And what a cast. It's got Denzel and Robert Townsend and James Fox and Cheryl Lee Ralph and, of course, M. Emmett Walsh. Man, did I love this movie when I watched it on VHS. And I bet I will love it again when I watch it again this winter, inspired by Get Millie Black.
So wait, when was the last time you saw this movie?
In like 1991, I think.
This is so baller. Oh my God, Dan, my respect for you just tripled. That is awesome. All right, June, what do you got?
So usually I read more nonfiction than fiction, and that's still true this year, but I have read some amazing novels this year, including, I must say, Dan's novel from this year, Hampton Heights, which I absolutely loved and which has actually kind of haunted me. But another novel that I really loved and has also stuck with me is Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst, which is, it's a beautifully written book. I think it might be kind of Hollinghurst's story of his own life, although, of course, that's just my projection. And one of the reasons I like it, I recognize, is that it is the story of a life of a gay Briton who is just a few years older than me, as is Hollinghurst, of course. And I think it's a beautiful portrayal of the evolution of British attitudes to things like gayness and race to a certain extent. Hollinghurst is white, but his character is biracial, and just kind of propriety and the way people rub along together. I absolutely loved it. I listened to the audiobook, which is beautifully narrated. And it was a book that really kind of every chapter there was a turn of phrase that just made me go, ooh, that's nice. And it kind of felt like a story of my own life as well, even though there was no one exactly like me in it. Loved it. Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst.
That's beautiful. And that is my winter reading treat. When I am on winter break and I don't have to think about anything else, that is the book I have set aside to fall into. I'm very excited.
As someone who's living out the Gutenberg elegy to end all Gutenberg elegies and like quintupling down on books as the only way to convey human truth, I finally decided to read Bleak House. I'm now 200 and plus pages in, and it's really slotting in already next to Middlemarch and Anna Karenina. I mean, it really is that good. It's remarkable, but here's how I sextupled down on the Gutenberg, elegy, which was, surely Nabokov loved this book. It has to be that Nabokov loved it. Nabokov didn't, because Nabokov, as you know, could absolutely trash A Sacred Cow, better than anybody, the corn-copied classics of Faulkner. And, when he hated something, he hated it with every ounce of his genius. So I just Googled, literally I put into Google Nabokov on Bleak House. And here's what I got. I have to read it in full. We are now ready to tackle Dickens. We are now ready to embrace Dickens. We are now ready to bask in Dickens. In our dealings with Jane Austen, we had to make a certain effort to join the ladies in the drawing room. In the case of Dickens, we remain at table with our tawny port. With Dickens, we expand. It seems to me that Jane Austen's fiction had been a charming rearrangement of old-fashioned values. In the case of Dickens, the values are new. Modern authors still get drunk on his vintage. Here, there is no problem of approach. As with Austen, no courtship, no dallying. We just surrender ourselves to Dickens' voice. That is all. If it were possible, I would like to devote 50 minutes of every class meeting to mute meditation, concentration, and admiration of Dickens. However, my job is to direct and rationalize those meditations, that admiration. All we have to do when reading Bleak House is to relax and let our spines take over. Although we read with our minds, the seat of artistic delight is between the shoulder blades. The little shiver behind is quite certainly the highest form of emotion that humanity has attained when evolving pure art and pure science. Let us worship the spine and its tingle. Let us be proud of being vertebrates, for we are vertebrates tipped at the head with a divine flame. The brain only continues the the spine. The wick really runs through the whole length of the candle. If we are not capable of enjoying that shiver, if we cannot enjoy literature, then let us give up the whole thing and concentrate on our comics, our videos, our books of the week. But I think Dickens will prove stronger.
That's entertainment. That's entertainment.
All right, June, thank you so much for coming on. It's always just a total pleasure to talk to the OG of OGs.
Thank you, Steve.
Dan, absolutely the same, directed at you. Thanks so much for being such a close friend of the program and filling in. It's always really fun talking to you.
My pleasure.
You will find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page at slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Patel. Our producer is Jared Downing. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. For Dan Coyce and June Thomas, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
That's entertainment. That's entertainment.
It's always fun to dive into the latest rumors, like who's dating who will be on the next season of our favorite show. Well, here's one rumor to squash the idea that Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That means it's accepted basically anywhere across the country. Don't pay attention to every rumor out there. But remember, it does pay to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
Morning people wake up for peace and quiet. McDonald's breakfast people, we wake up for the sweet rush of getting that warm, delicious breakfast right before it ends.
Crush your morning goals with a steak, egg, and cheese bagel or any breakfast sandwich and snag another one for just $1 with the buy one, get one deal. Only in the McDonald's app. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid once per day. Must opt into rewards.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.